take a trip to the psychedelic rock era. Have you ever wondered what happened behind the scenes during the mind-altering, kaleidoscopic explosion of the psychedelic rock era? This shocking revelation will have you questioning reality and scrambling for your vinyl collection. In this video, we'll take a trip to the psychedelic rock era and explore its shocking history. We'll learn about the drugs that fueled the movement, the musicians influenced by it, and the devastating consequences some of them suffered. So stick to the end of the video to learn what everyone who loves psychedelic rock needs to know. It's not all fun and games. And don't forget to subscribe. The psychedelic rock era, often referred to simply as psychedelic rock, was a musical period in the 1960s and early 1970s characterized by rock music incorporating psychedelic elements. This genre was defined by its use of mind-altering substances, experimentation with sound, and a departure from conventional song structures. Musicians in this era often used effects like reverb and distortion to create a trippy, otherworldly sound. Lyrics frequently explored surreal or introspective themes influenced by psychedelic experiences. Simply, we can say that psychedelic rock is a special kind of music that started in the 1960s. It's all about making music that sounds like the way you might feel when you take certain drugs that make you see and think differently. Imagine if music could take you on a magical journey inside your mind. That's what psychedelic rock tried to do. They used cool electronic sounds, tricks in the recording studio, and sometimes even instruments from other parts of the world to make their music sound different. People who made this music were from different backgrounds. Some liked folk, jazz, or blues music, while others were into Indian classical music. They mixed these styles with their ideas to create something new. There were two main types of psychedelic rock. The British kind was more dreamy and imaginative, like a colorful daydream. The American West Coast style was louder and wilder, often called acid rock. The music industry was on the verge of a significant shift in the early 1960s, bringing in the psychedelic rock era that would follow. The psychedelic movement owes much to the birth of ideas and individuals during this time. Psychedelic music and the rise of the hippie subculture weren't overnight phenomena, as remarked by Barry Miles, a significant player in the UK underground scene of the 1960s. An apparent youth movement in the United States began to take shape in 1965, marking a watershed year. This year, several pioneering groups that would later be known as psychedelic rock would form. Augustus Owsley Stanley III and Ken Kesey, who organized acid tests and other psychedelic events, contributed to the spread of LSD use across the Atlantic. Poets from the Beat generation, such as Allen Ginsberg, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, and Gregory Corso, all visited the UK, where they performed at the Royal Albert Hall, and the World Psychedelic Center was founded. Granny Takes a Trip and Hung on You were just two stores that ushered in a new era of bold color and individual style in London. The Beatles were instrumental in developing psychedelic music and have been called the acid apostles of the New Age. Famous for his comedic and novelty songs, producer George Martin adapted to the Beatles' requests for new approaches to recording. Incorporating a subtle India-inspired drone, their 1965 hit Ticket to Ride foreshadowed the psychedelic route the band would eventually adopt. The Beatles contributed substantially to the developing genre with their innovative rhythms, tonal ambiguity, fusion of Indian music components, and avant-garde experimentation. The Byrds from Los Angeles' folk rock culture and the Yardbirds from England's blues scene contributed significantly to early psychedelic rock development. In 1965, the Byrds topped the charts with their cover of Mr. Tambourine Man by Bob Dylan, after switching to electric instruments after being influenced by A Hard Day's Night by the Beatles. This manic eclecticism was epitomized by the Yardbirds, whose music featured minor, vital melodies, instrumental breakdowns, tempo changes, and even Gregorian chanting. Their heart full of soul cover sounded so much like a sitar it was almost unrecognizable. The Beatles' use of Indian instrumentation, particularly the sitar, in their late 1965 song Norwegian Wood, was a significant turning point in the evolution of raga rock within the psychedelic genre. The album Rubber Soul, on which this song appears, is frequently cited as the starting point of the psychedelic era. In 1965, the Haight-Ashbury district of San Francisco became a hotspot for psychedelic experimentation, making the city a center of the psychedelic movement on the West Coast. The San Francisco sound owes a great deal to the efforts of many people, including Chet Helms of the Family Dog, who hosted basement events, and Marty Balin and his partners, who opened the Matrix nightclub. The Fillmore and the Avalon Ballroom featured elaborate light shows with psychedelic themes and were pivotal locations for the growing psychedelic rock movement. Bill Graham brought many of the most influential psychedelic rock acts to the Fillmore. The Grateful Dead supposedly created acid rock during a December 1965 San Jose, California concert. The employment of strobe lights to simulate the hallucinatory and disjointed effects of LSD was a watershed moment in the evolution of the psychedelic subculture. In 1966, psychedelic rock established its canonical sound and reached a wider audience. Many of the foundational aspects of psychedelic music began to take shape in this pivotal year. There is general agreement that the Yardbirds' Shapes of Things and the Byrds' 8 Miles High, released in 1966, were the first major psychedelic hits. Jeff Beck's guitar work on Shapes of Things features a fuzz tone and harmonic feedback, continuing the Yardbirds' investigation into guitar effects, Eastern scales, and shifting rhythms. The song's lyrics, Stream of Consciousness, seem to touch on anti-war or environmental concerns. But in 8 Miles High, Roger McGuinn's 12-string Rickenbacker guitar brought a psychedelic take on free jazz and Indian raga. At first, the Byrds denied any connection to drug use in the song's lyrics, but the association quickly spread. The album's Pet Sounds, May 1966, by the Beach Boys and Revolver, August 1966 by the Beatles, were critically important in the development of psychedelic rock. Songs like I Just Wasn't Made for These Times included the first usage of theremin sounds on a rock record, and Pet Sounds incorporated experimental themes, hallucinogenic lyrics, and inventive sound effects. The album Revolver featured the song Rain, which had a psychedelic sound and message achieved in part by using mirrored sound. When the Beach Boys released Good Vibrations in October 1966, the song's trippy lyrics and soundscapes helped bring psychedelia into the mainstream. As a result of the song's popularity, there was a revival of theremins and an increasing interest in analog synthesizers. The year 1967 got much attention from the media and became more famous outside of psychedelic communities. From 1967 to 1968, it was the most famous rock music, and there were two main styles: the British version, which was more fun, and the more complex American West Coast acid rock. British psychedelic music often tried new things while staying true to pop song patterns. The American psychedelic scene, on the other hand, was made up of three types of music: the acid jams of San Francisco bands that preferred albums to singles, the pop psychedelia of groups like the Beach Boys and Buffalo Springfield, and the wigged-out music of bands that listened to the Beatles and the Yardbirds. The Beatles' double A-side song Strawberry Fields Forever Penny Lane was a big part of how the psychedelic scene turned out. This album started the English pop pastoral movement and an LSD-fueled interest in childhood memories. With songs like Arnold Lane and See Emily Play, led by Syd Barrett, Pink Floyd set the standard for pop psychedelia in the UK. Underground clubs in London like the UFO Club and the Roundhouse were important in the rise of British psychedelia. American organizer and producer Joe Boyd was also involved in this scene. The Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band came out in May 1967, and the Monterey Pop Festival was held in June. Both of these events helped bring psychedelic rock to a broader audience. Sgt. Pepper was essential because it changed how albums should be made and encouraged people to be different. During the Summer of Love in 1967, many young people were in San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury neighborhood. The Monterey Pop Festival made singers like Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, and The Who famous. Psychedelia was welcomed by many well-known British invasion bands, such as Eric Burdon, The Who, The Hollies, and The Rolling Stones. The popularity of psychedelic rock had started to dwindle by the end of the 1960s. The 1969 Woodstock event, which featured legendary bands like Jimi Hendrix, Jefferson Airplane, and the Grateful Dead, is often regarded as the high point of the psychedelic movement. But dramatic shifts were on the horizon. LSD, a symbol of the psychedelic movement, was made illegal in the United Kingdom in September 1966, and the state of California in October of the same year. Tragedy struck in 1969, fueling the fires of opposition to the hippie movement. The murders of Sharon Tate and the La Bianca couple by Charles Manson and his cult, who claimed inspiration from Beatles songs like Helter Skelter, stoked fears about the evil side of the counterculture. Infamously, Hell's Angel security agents fatally stabbed adolescent Meredith Hunter at the Rolling Stones' Altamont Free concert in California. Some well-known musicians at the time had trouble coping with the fallout of their psychedelic experiences amid this shifting context. When founding members of prominent bands like the Beach Boys' Brian Wilson, the Rolling Stones' Brian Jones, Fleetwood Mac's Peter Green and Danny Kirwan, and Pink Floyd's Syd Barrett died, their bands changed course. The music industry was similarly hit by losing key figures. Jimi Hendrix passed away in London in September of 1970, not long after completing Band of Gypsies. In October 1970, Janis Joplin died of a heroin overdose, and in July 1971, Jim Morrison of The Doors did the same. The bands that managed to stay together began to branch out from psychedelic music and experiment with other styles, such as more stripped-down roots rock, progressive rock, or riff-based heavy metal. The conclusion of the psychedelic rock era signaled the beginning of a more diverse musical age. In the late 1980s, Manchester's thriving music industry gave birth to a new musical hybrid, Manchester. Artists in this subgenre were masters at fusing disparate musical styles, often incorporating psychedelic and 1960s pop elements into alternative rock. In the early 1990s, the British music press popularized the term Manchester to describe a particular style of music. Specifically, the psychedelic rock tradition of the 1980s has a natural successor in Manchester. Bands like the Stone Roses, Happy Mondays, and In Spiral Carpets were integral to this scene. The use of drugs, especially ecstasy, significantly impacted the development of this musical subculture's signature sound and aesthetic. In sum, the psychedelic rock movement of the 1960s left behind a legacy that has shaped and influenced music ever since. By bridging the gap between rock and electronic dance music, Manchester and the broader rock-rave crossover exemplify how the spirit of experimentation and boundary pushing from the 1960s continues to alter the musical environment. The fact that psychedelic rock is still influential decades after its first release is a testament to its staying power. With that said, let's give it a wrap. But before signing off, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. See you again with another exciting video.